Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Gio and Joey show. We have a solo episode, meaning just the two of us, no guests planned. But Joey, how you doing? Let us know what we're going to talk about. Yeah,
Yeah, so I mean, it's been a slow weekend in the news. Nothing major has
I know
happened.
nothing.
So real slow day. No, I'm kidding. No, I figured it would be good for us to kind of hop on and talk about the recent events in Iran and that situation from a Christian perspective, and particularly as Adventists, right, who see we as a people are primed to see prophetic movements. And so I just wanted to talk in a balanced way because I feel
Hmm.
like sometimes,
We overdo it.
how do I say this? Prophecy, how do I say this? Like the Bible gives us prophecy so that we can have waymarks that Jesus is coming soon. But sometimes I feel like the way people, it can get almost a little overzealous and they end up trying to use prophecy as like
For
a crystal
everything.
ball.
Yeah.
And prophecy is not a crystal ball, but I think good advice, right? And this is what I would say about somebody asked me, and I guess just diving into the conversation here, but
Hmm.
somebody asked me, about this, like when you see the attack in Iran, right? Do you see that as as evidence that the world is about to end? And I say, I see exactly what Jesus told us, right? Jesus said, when you see these things begin to happen, look up, for your redemption draweth nigh. And that's as far as prophecy goes, that's all I can really say about how the Iran situation is intervened, because I don't, further than that, I think you have to analyze the event on its own merits.
Hmm.
And we know
And
like
let me,
wars
yeah.
and rumors of wars, yes, but
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say. Jesus definitely speaks about there will be wars and rumors of wars, and this is it. But one other thing I do like to say is, or I've shared with my friends, is you can see America flexing its muscle and exerting itself as not exerting itself, but letting the world know don't mess with America. And you could see that prophetically speaking, we are the lone superpower in the world. Now, and every event in history does move us closer to the second coming of Christ. But does this have a chapter and verse in the Bible that says this is something eminently prophetic? The answer is
oh,
no. Can you hear me? Or did you lose me? Well, let me keep going while Joey gets his act together there. Like this event doesn't have a chapter and verse prophetically, but it does show the power of the United States, how not too many people or not anyone really can stand up to us. Iran thought that they had China and Russia, but all they've done in this bombing is talk and rhetoric. Can you hear me, Joey?
now I can, but you're frozen. Am I frozen?
Mm. No, you're not frozen. I don't see anybody
Okay.
frozen. Yeah, it's on your end. Well, anyway, Iran thought they had Russia and China as allies, but we see that when push come to shove, they're not lending a hand militarily. And Russia can't afford it. It's in the middle of a war with Ukraine, and China doesn't want to lose its oil pipeline that they get from Iran. And I don't know how much exactly. Do you know how much oil Iran supplies China?
No, I don't know. I know in how all this is connected, I know China has been buying, and they've been one of the main buyers of Russian oil, which
Mm-hmm.
has been how Russia has been funding, its war. Um, but yeah, no, I mean it is interesting, and one of the things that it's I'm certainly not the first person to observe this, but really what we're seeing in Iran has been years in the making, in the sense that
47.
if this had happened, you know, well, prior to October 7, right? So 3 years ago or 5 years ago, because Iran's been a threat for a long time, but it would have there would have been much more strong resistance,
Mm-hmm.
right? But what has actually happened over the last 3 years since October 7 is that all of Iran's proxies, right? Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, right? They've been systematically dismantled over the last 3 years. Um, and of its major power allies, right? Russia has been, very degraded. Like, yeah, they launched this
Mm-hmm.
war. They thought it would be over in 3 days, right? They've been in a quagmire thanks, to the bravery of the Ukrainian people.
Mm-hmm.
They've been in this quagmire for 4 years, and the lines are hardly moving. And in fact, Ukraine has taken back some territory, and so they're bogged down, right? And Russia's other ally, Syria, right? The dictator there was overthrown, and so America is kind of uniquely strong at this moment. Um, One of the things that's been coming up a lot online, right, is there are a lot of Christians, right, who are kind of on different sides of this. I guess I would just say, as a pastor, like, what have you kind of seen, just like me observing online, the Christian discourse about Iran and this whole situation?
Well, if you're talking about, I'm going to leave my personal church out of it, but
Oh,
just
of course. I'm just
among,
talking about like
yeah, yeah,
broadly online.
yeah, on Facebook and Twitter and stuff. Well, both of them are two different animals, right? On Facebook, everybody is against this. Everybody thinks we shouldn't be doing this. And it's funny because it's all done based on the current administration, the hatred for the current administration. I never see them in their commentary talking about the 32,000 reported killed by this Iranian regime and how many Iranians are looking this as an answer to prayer, right? So
Mm.
here you have Christians in Iran praying for liberation from this, and that you have some Christians here saying that it is a bad thing. Now, on X, it's been mostly positive. Although, you have some, like Matt Walsh is kind of against it. He's questioning the rationale behind it. And yeah, so that's basically it. And those are two different animals. For me, though, personally, as a Christian myself, I don't like war, right? And generally, I try to stay out of it. But I mainly have gotten to the point where I realize, one, I don't understand, I don't know what our military knows, what our commander in chief knows. But from what I do know, Iran is a terrorist organization. They have
Mm.
caused mad, they fund the terrorist attack of October 7th. They have killed many Americans throughout the world. Even Saudi Arabia has joined us openly because they know Iran and that type of radical Islam is unhinged. And so, from that standpoint, I'm fine with it, right? Because Romans 13 says the government will not bear the sword in vain. We have tried diplomacy for many years. And finally, action needed to be taken. You can't draw a line in the sand and keep letting them walk over it without consequences. What have you seen on both sides of the aisle? Because I know you're on X and you're on Facebook as well.
Yeah, no, I've basically seen the same thing. I mean, the usual suspects, right? That anything President Trump does has to be bad. And listen, everyone, if you watch this show, I'm not a fan of the president, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
also not willing to condemn things that I would support under normal circumstances. I'm not willing to condemn them just because Donald Trump does them. And I personally think Marco Rubio is a very competent Secretary of State. But one of the things I've seen, particularly from some of my fellow Adventists, right, and other
Mm-hmm.
Christians who tend to be on the more pacifist, anti-war side. And listen, I share your sentiment, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
war is awful, and I wish it never happened.
Yes.
Um, but at the same time, right? If if only the people who want peace, or if only the people who want peace are pacifists, well, that's a carte blanche for the people who don't want peace to act unopposed,
Yeah, that's
right? It's
kind
like,
of appeasement.
yeah, that's appeasement. And listen, in an ideal world, right, people say, like, I just want to, I wish every country would just, I don't want America to be the policeman of the world, right? Or I don't want any country to, and I wish every country would just stay in its borders and, just mind their own business. And yeah, sure, that sounds great, although it doesn't necessarily sound super great, because I don't know that I'm necessarily okay with, countries just staying in their own borders and doing whatever they want, right?
Mm-hmm.
Persecuting minorities and everything, right? I think sometimes, like, I think like I always say, I am a fan of the Treaty of Westphalia, right? I like the nation state model, and I think national sovereignty is a good principle, but every good principle taken to excess, right, becomes a vice.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, national sovereignty, um, but that doesn't mean that national sovereignty can never be overridden, right? There are times, and then Iran also, and then just the fact that Iran doesn't stay within its own borders, so they're internally persecutory, right? Something like 70% of the Persian, and I say the Persian people,
Mm-hmm.
um, because I just there's something historic about this is a great people,
Mm-hmm.
and they're held down. And one thing that people don't know, right? The Islamic regime, has been ruling this country since 1979.
79, yeah.
But Christianity is a faster growing religion than Islam. And in fact, by some reports I've seen, there are actually more evangelical Christians in Iran than Muslims.
Mm-hmm.
Because here's the thing, and this kind of ties into another point that I'll make in a minute, but here's the thing:
Wow.
political Islam and its abuse and its right, it's using the sword to enforce the religious edicts. It's not popular with the people, right? The people
Mm-hmm.
haven't chosen this religion, it's been forced upon them. And while, yes, Islam was the majority of the religion, at the beginning, after what, 40 some years of this regime, they're kind of done with Islam, right? And
Mm-hmm.
especially among younger Iranians, right? They don't want anything to do with Islam in their own lives. And so I would just say to our Christian nationalist friends, especially the more extreme ones, people like, Joel Webben and these people who
Mm-hmm.
talk about they want kind of their own Islamic version of Christianity. Well, that's sometimes the religious fanatics can gain power, as we saw with the Iranian regime, but you often lose the heart of the people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's just something to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you this question because I was talking with it with a very liberal friend of mine who's basically a communist. Um, because I see differences, but you're the one studying this stuff. What's it? How do you view this differently from, like, let's say, what George Bush did with Iraq?
Um, well, I mean, the first thing I'll say is I think George Bush's actions are not necessarily viewed with the kind of nuance that I think would be historically fair.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just say that out there. I'm not a George Bush hater. But
Mm-hmm.
no, but there are some profound differences, mainly um, like the situation on the ground among the people, right? In Iraq, there were no kind of clear. Now, there's still a lot. I'm not going to try to gaslight people. While I'm hopeful, cautiously, that the end of the regime could bring a better situation, there are still perils. But one of the
Mm-hmm.
differences in Iran is this fact that, well, again, the majority of the population is, becoming Christian. So that's one thing, right? There's not as much radicalism among the people. Whereas in Iraq, right, we had the dictator Saddam Hussein, who was basically a secular Muslim. His
Mm-hmm.
regime was a secular regime, and his Ba'athist party, right? They kind of ruled with an iron thumb, but underneath them was, there was Shias and Sunnis, and I always forget. I think Iraq majority Shia. Yeah, Iraq is majority Shia, but the Baathites were like, again, they were mostly, it was a secular political party, but they were like Sunni Muslims, and they represented the minority of the country, and this minority had been ruling over the majority, right? And so that's one of the things. And so what do you think happened when you topple it and
Mm-hmm.
then just put kind of no guardrails democracy? Well, what does democracy mean when you have a majority that had been persecuted for years? And I mean, let's not mistake it. Saddam was awful. He was a terrible
Yes.
human being. But when he was overthrown, democracy meant, well, now the Shias, we have power. And what are we
Yeah.
going to use that power for?
To
We're going to,
persecute the Sunnis.
yeah. And so it just went tribal warfare. There was no real political consensus, and it kind of devolved. Um,
Into a
And
civil
then
war, basically.
and then obviously we got the rise of ISIS right out of that.
Hmm.
Um, Now some of the nuance I will add: George W. Bush did achieve his objectives, right? He toppled Saddam, and as long as we were there, right, we did maintain security, right? And we can have all the arguments in the world about the initial decision to go in, right?
Yeah.
I When I was younger, I was much more like rah rah rah, like whatever.
Hmm.
My opinion on that is become a lot more nuanced. But what I will say, once we went in, what the Obama administration did in surrendering the country, like in just leaving, that is also in just totally irresponsible, right? Like
Hmm.
we can have an argument about whether we should have gone in, but you can't leave the way we left.
Yeah.
And I don't
Total
think that
vacuum.
necessarily had to happen.
And what about with Iran now? Because from what I'm hearing, right, is that we're not going to put a massive amount of troops on the ground if we put any at all. That this is basically what we did to Venezuela. Get rid of the leadership, hopefully another leader, even if unfortunately it's the same kind, but that it's less oppressive. Um, they might tolerate that. But with kind of like with the notion that if you act up, we'll get rid of you too. And so with no boots on the ground, it makes it totally different. Well, not yeah, in a sense. Go ahead.
Well, I am sure that there are boots on the ground,
Oh yeah,
but
but
they're the
that's why I
boots.
said
They're
not.
the boots that people don't talk about, right? Because I
Yeah,
guarantee
not
you, there's Navy
major.
SEALs
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Green Berets
Beret,
and
yeah. I'm talking about
others.
a major like in Iraq that it was full on battalions and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I would say like I think looking at Iran, I don't think that would be a worthwhile outcome, right?
Hmm.
Particularly the investment that we put in this, right? The strategicness of taking out. I mean, we took out the Ayatollah. This man had been in
Hmm.
power for, since
Since
I think
'89.
since 90. Well,
Yeah,
no, did
no,
he come into power? Well, he was president first before he was
since
Ayatollah.
80,
Well, whatever.
since
He's been in
'89.
power for decades.
Hmm.
And no, he because was it 89? Okay,
Yeah, I think
79
so.
was the revolution, and that was the
Yeah,
first Ayatollah, Khomeini,
yeah, yeah.
and then he was the predecessor.
Hmm.
Um, so that was a major action, but I think to leave the Islamic regime in place, knowing what they've already done to their people, it's not the cycle is not going to end. Um,
But the
I
question
know
then
what I
becomes, how do you get them out if you're not going to put major boots on the ground?
again. I don't think that, and especially if you look at the language Trump has actually used regarding this
Hmm.
operation, I don't think the administration is under the illusion that this is going to be super quick. Now they're obviously saying not going to be a forever war,
Yeah.
and I hope so. I don't think anyone should want a forever war. I All I'm saying is, and again, I'm not a Middle Eastern expert,
Hmm.
but I just hope, and I do. Well, I'm not a huge fan of Trump. I do have confidence that Trump's priorities are right in regard to Iran. I think he's talked for years. He's talked about the threat of it. One of his major
Hmm.
criticisms of Obama was the Iran nuclear deal that basically bribed the regime with billions and billions and pallets of cash, to please don't make a bomb, pretty please.
Hmm.
And so that was failed. And so I think he's kind of been directionally right on this. And I do think Marco Rubio has a clear-eyed view. And so again, maybe we'll talk about this later, but that would just be kind of my initial thoughts without, I'm not an expert, but
Yeah. Yeah. What I'm hoping for is I would love to see, because people are talking about that the succession of the king of Iran or the leaders that were in charge before the revolution are still alive. And, successors of that are still alive. And
the Shah's
they,
son.
yeah. And they would want to put him back in power and try to get it. And I wouldn't be opposed to having, um, like you said, SEALs or Green Beret get in there and kind of secure his victory. Because after the revolution, I'm pretty sure they'll be more diligent and more quick to seek aid should something like that happen again. Because if you see the pictures, and maybe I could put them up or not, but pictures of Iran before this, it was, people describe Iran as a Western civilization in the Middle East before 1979. Now, I don't know how much of that is true, but at least from the pictures, it looked like America in that day. Same dress, same, women, education, and walking around. So I don't know your thoughts.
Yeah, so the Shah, well, first, the Shah was an ally of the United States and of Western
Mm-hmm.
powers. Iran, like, obviously, this is crazy to think about today because of the regime, but Iran was actually one of Israel's closest allies in the region under the Shah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yes, from the reports I've been reading out of Iran, a lot of people are nostalgic for the Shah.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, what we have to remember is the Islamic Revolution happened for a reason, right? The Shah, while yes, objectively, the treatment of women, right, the opportunities,
Mm-hmm.
right, the kind of freedom from religious oppression was obviously much better under the Shah. But the Shah was a dictator. We shouldn't kid
Mm-hmm.
ourselves about that. He was not
Yeah.
a democratic guy, right? He was a dictator. There was restrictions on the press. People were jailed for speech, right? These kind of things
Mm-hmm.
that happen in dictatorships. The one thing I would say, listen, I don't know how realistic. I know I've seen some reports that there have apparently the Shah's son, who again, he has been living in exile in the West, I believe in the
Mm-hmm.
United States. Um, and so, he's been in a Western country.
But
The
that's what
thing
I
this year,
mentioned earlier, that perhaps he has learned from those mistakes, right? And kind of, because what I heard with that is that he'd want to implement a more democratic version of what they
yeah.
had, right? And so hopefully that's the case. People can learn. Hopefully he has.
Well, and what I would say is, and this I think, and again, I'm not obviously in on the meetings, of course,
Yeah, yeah,
but what I would hope that if the United States is working with the Shah San, and again, I don't know that they actually officially are or not,
yeah.
but if they would, I hope that one of the conditions would be, there would be strict conditions about the fact that BC said he wants to lead. He keeps talking, he cares about the Iranian people. He
Mm-hmm.
wants the lion to rise again. And so I would hope that the restrictions on any kind of deal with him would be that he keep his word about the transition to
Mm-hmm.
democracy, right?
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't have a right to rule because his father was the Shah,
Yeah.
right? The Iranian people, the 70% that have been oppressed by this regime, that have seen their daughters killed for not wearing a burqa, right? That
Mm-hmm.
have been oppressed in countless myriad ways. They deserve a say in their lives, and so I think
Mm-hmm.
that, like I said, America doesn't have to act everywhere in the world, but when it does act, it ought to act justly. So I would hope
And not
the
only
Iranian people
justly,
take into
because that should be
consideration.
expected at all times. To me, it's, and also decisively. Don't
Mhm.
half measure this. Go in there, do what you got to do, and try to achieve the objective of having an ally there, like we used to have, and make the region safe. And I've seen not protests. I've seen celebrations of Iranians and Jews,
Mm.
draped in each other's flags, and that's what you hope for, right? All we want is peace. At least that's what. Now, that being said, what do you think of the people who oppose this? And I don't like talking party politics, but the majority of Democrats who who are opposing this, what do you say to them? Because look, they hate Trump, but they tend to fight for liberation, right? Free Palestine, and yet they're quiet on Iran. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I would put those who oppose the war in different camps. They're not all created equal. I have
Mm-hmm.
more
Mm-hmm.
respect for some of their views than others. Right? There are people, right, our Christian pacifist friends who are objectively against every intervention and every war. And while I sympathize with them in an ideal world, I'm against every war too. I
Mm-hmm.
think things are a little more complicated than that in the sinful world.
Yeah.
But that's a position that I can like put on a shelf and be like, okay, these aren't bad people, right? Like they're
Mm-hmm.
just maybe in my view they have a naive view of the world, but I don't think they're bad people, right? And that's one thing. Um, there are some people on the left who are just reflexively anti anything Donald Trump does.
Mm-hmm.
And, what can you say to that? Right? Like, that's not really a reasoned opposition. Then there are some people on the left who, like those Christian pacifist friends, right? Like, are principally against all intervention. And while I may disagree with them or whatever, like, that's their position. But there is a group that I have less sympathy for, and listen, Matt Walsh is kind of in the camp of he just doesn't want any U.S. involvement anywhere,
Mm-hmm.
and at least he's consistent about that. Like whether it's friend or foe, he doesn't want us involved.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. But what I think people like Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson are doing is something totally different. They
Tell
want
us.
they have a particular vision of the world order, and they want it enforced, right? And yes, I do think for people like this, it's tinged with anti-Semitism, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'll just make one point because this is one thing that people like this will often say. They'll say, "Well, and Tucker has said this explicitly. Well, we are fighting another of Israel's wars."
Mm-hmm.
And first of all, I would just say, listen, there was going back to the Beirut, embassy or the Beirut embassy bombing, the Beirut barracks bombing, the Marine barracks bombing.
Didn't they have
This
something to do with the coal ship bombing as well, Iran? Or that's not
Yeah, I
confirmed?
believe so.
Mm-hmm.
I'd have to look in the details of that specific one. But there have been over the last 47 years, I believe, there's been many instances of them attacking. Right, they have killed hundreds, if not thousands of them. Well, let's just say hundreds because that's what I know
Mm-hmm.
for sure of U.S. servicemen all across the Middle East, whether it was in Iraq, whether it was in Syria, whether it was throughout. So they've very firmly been an enemy of the United States. But right, like when the implication, this is another of Israel's wars. Well, here's the problem. Yes, Israel has been laser focused on Iran because Iran poses the most
Mm-hmm.
pressing and immediate threat to them. But the idea that U.S. policy has been dictated by Israel, this is just simply not true. One of the things that people say, and again, going back to the Iraq War, people can have all their arguments, right, and we can have that nuanced discussion about whether it was the wisest choice to invade. But the idea that Israel decided, hey, you need to invade Iraq, not true. The prime minister at the time, Sharon, I believe, um, he pressured Bush against invading Iraq. He said, no, 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 no. Iran is the threat. And this was all the way back then in
Yeah.
like when the initial invasion there. And he said,
Mm-hmm.
no, no, Iran is the initial threat. And for a whole host of reasons, Bush saw Saddam as the threat. And listen, Saddam posed threats. Saddam was not a good guy. He did have a nuclear program. Now, he did not, there were not weapons of mass destruction. We did not find them. But we know he did have a nuclear program. He did make verbal utterances about like provocating about, whether about their right to have nuclear weapons, these things. But also, in Bush's mind, I'm sure, is the remembrance of what Saddam did to Kuwait under his father's
Mm-hmm.
presidency, right?
Yep.
Saddam
Mm-hmm.
had just not that long before invaded Kuwait. And so for a
Mm-hmm.
whole host of reasons, he saw Iraq as a more of a hotbed or whatever. And again, that
I
can be
remember
disagreed
back
with.
then it was the talk of payback for 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 invading during dad's presidency. Like the pundits were saying that it was kind of like a form of payback to finish the war that his dad had started. Keep going.
Mm. Yeah, no, and I would just say there can be disagreements about the decision to go in Iraq, right? Historical, like, we can look back at it and say, hey, was this the best move? All that. But the idea that the reason we went into Iraq was because the Jews were pulling the strings,
Mhm.
this is just ahistorical and it's not true.
Mm. Well, what would you say though about? I haven't heard it, but many people are saying that the only reason we attacked this time at this point is because Israel said they were going to attack Iran, and with or without us, and we said, "All right, well, we'll join you." What do you think of that? Rubio just kind of seems to allude to that. I haven't seen the
I mean,
clip, but people are saying that's what he said.
I mean, that may be true, but I mean, I think this has been up to a boiling point for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
right? The U.S. and Israel, they share intelligence, right? So the idea that it just kind of came out of the blue, I would find hard to believe.
Yeah, so do I. I was telling my wife that you don't, you do not attack Iran or Venezuela on a whim, right? There's planning ahead of this. These massive aircraft carriers need time to get there, right? So obviously there's some strategic, there's some planning going on that an impossible invasion may happen. And you have to strike when they're at their most vulnerable. And most of these missions, right, are done in the middle of the night. Iron Hammer or whatever it was, where we took out the nuclear facilities, was in the middle of the night. But this, because of the intelligence that all these leaders were in one spot, was at 9:45 in the morning, broad daylight, and they had the guts and the, well, I don't want to say guts. From what I'm hearing is we have some weapons that other armies are looking at us like, ah, yeah, we're not messing with them. Supposedly, what we did was send out massive electronic, like, jamming things. So they couldn't tell with their radars anything. And which allowed our Air Force to come in, bomb away, and get out without casualty. So, you know, hoorah. You know, one way I smile because, hey, I'm a U.S. citizen. I want us to have the best army in the world. But then obviously prophetically you think, all right, well, the beast is flexing its muscle. One day it'll go rogue.
Yeah, and coming back, they brought back up the prophecy situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's like what you always say, right? Like, we know what's going to happen,
But we
but like you
can't.
say, right, we can't judge the nation based on what
Mm-hmm.
will happen in the future. I
Yeah.
think, and this has always been my view, right? You have to take every news story on its own merits, and you have to
Mm-hmm.
judge the actions. There are plenty of things, right, that people can criticize America for, um, but what I still maintain that America has made many mistakes, right? It is not a perfect country because this side of heaven, perfect countries
Yeah.
don't exist.
Mm-hmm.
But America has done and historically has been, and I would still argue that problems and all, it is still the greatest force for good in the world. Now,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, and sometimes,
Yeah. You're frozen.
but obvious. Oh, I'm frozen.
No, no, good.
I freeze.
There you go. You
Yeah,
unfroze. Go.
but well, honestly, I see. We'll have to do a full one on like Revelation 13. But
Mm-hmm.
honestly, will I see, the seeds of like I do believe that Revelation 13 will come to pass. Um, I kind of just forgot where I'm going.
All right. Well, while you think of that, I have another thing. What are your thoughts on NATO? The older I get, the more frustrated I am with NATO, and with the fact that initially France, uh, the United Kingdom, and Spain were like, no, we're not getting involved, and you can't use our bases for launching attacks on Iran, which is supposed to be NATO allies. Your thoughts?
Well, first I would say not to be too disagreeable, but I think
Mm-hmm.
I think NATO is one of the most important alliances
Mm-hmm.
in the world, and
Yeah.
probably one of the most successful and important alliances in world history. I think it is very
Mm-hmm.
important for our mutual security, right? The way I would look at our
But but
relationship
but
with
but I think,
NATO,
look, I think what you're saying, and I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but what I hear is, you know, communism, socialism sounds great in theory, but in action is horrible. NATO sounds
mm,
great in theory, but if they're not going to pony up, if we got to carry the military might and we got to carry the financial might of NATO, then why are we benefiting from? You know what I mean? Like, it's frustrating that England,
the
France, and
only
Spain were
time
like, we don't want to help.
the only time the article is it Article 5 that's the mutual defense, The
Mm-hmm.
only time that Article 5 has ever been invoked has been the United States invoking it in the aftermath of 9/11, and
Mm-hmm.
NATO absolutely and unequivocally answered the call. Now,
Mm-hmm.
and what I was going to say though is like our relationship with our NATO partners is like a relationship between a rowdy bunch of siblings, right? There
Mm-hmm.
are fights, right? Listen, long before Trump, right? Presidents of both parties have been saying like, "Hey guys, you really should be meeting your defense payments." And while I've criticized Trump, one thing that has come from these years is NATO has drastically. Now, I think a lot of what pushed the spurring in their spending has been, Russia's actions in Ukraine, right?
Mm-hmm.
The reality of the need has been seen, and they've been drawing more. Listen, when it comes to this, I mean, when you had just think about throughout last year, right? You had the insults, right? Like, oh, Europe never answers the call, right? Can we depend on them? Even the fact that their soldiers died alongside ours in our defense after 9/11. So it's like,
Mm-hmm.
and I believe all three of those countries have come around now, from what I understand, correct?
And not Spain, France, and
Oh, no, sorry.
and from the last I saw, not Spain, but France and England, but only
But
because
England was on our
they're
board with us from the beginning.
no, they weren't. No,
The
initially it
UK,
was
the
like
UK issued a statement condemning the regime, and yeah,
yeah, but we couldn't
I
use
read a
their
statement from Keir
bases.
Starmer.
We
What?
couldn't use. They didn't want us to use our own bases in their country to launch attacks, and only until they're. From what I saw, obviously I could be corrected, but what I saw, it wasn't until their citizens were being threatened in Dubai. Oh, I did see a video from their leader directly. Was when they were like, "Okay, we're on board." Come on, that's Bush.
Yeah.
No pun intended.
Well, like I said, there have been 2025 was a trying year for our alliances.
Hmm.
Um, but at the end of the day, I don't. I there will. Let me say this: what I am confident of, the NATO countries are not going to come out on the side of any of our enemies. That will
Hmm.
not happen. I'm
Yeah.
confident of that. And so, while we may have to do some pushing and prodding, right, getting get their defense spending up, right, like,
Hmm.
yeah, we continue to do that. I just want to be very clear that I do view our spats with NATO as
Sibling rivalry.
siblings fighting, right? Like
Yeah.
these are people who have died, right? Like, and it goes back to when the conversation was about Greenland, right, which is controlled by the Kingdom of Denmark. Danes outside of America, Danes had the most casualties in the war on terror, right?
Hmm.
That was fighting right alongside Americans, right? Their blood spilled right next to American blood, and so,
Yeah, but
like I
that's
said,
not Spain, France, or
no, that's not, but that's
England.
NATO.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But that's
Well, all of
these
those countries
knuckleheads.
participated in the war on terror.
I swear, I don't like the French. They'd be speaking
I mean,
German if it
listen,
wasn't for
ever
us.
since the French Revolution, France has had real problems. I mean, they're on
Yeah,
what, their fifth republic?
yeah.
So, I mean,
All right,
they
so let
have
me
their
ask you this.
problems, but
Let me ask you this, because I kind of brought it up, but I want to hear now more in detail your point. Uh, Russia and China, they're supposed to be the NATO version to Iran. They're not going to do anything as far as military. Why do you think that is? Is it because they're too extended? Russia in Russia's case, and China, they just don't want to deal with it. Your thoughts?
so on Russia, you're spot on. I mean, that's the
Mm-hmm.
only reason. So Bashar al-Assad in Syria, he had managed. I mean, his father was in power, and he had managed to cling on to the regime for long past his popularity with the Syrian people. Now, there had been the Syrian civil war. He survived it. He remained in power, and he lost power. Right? Why did he lose power? Because the thing that he always had that he could count on was Russian troops
Mm-hmm.
suppressing his enemies. But in this last round, the rebels, they were able to fight without the opposition of Russian troops because the Russian troops are busy committing war crimes in Ukraine. And so, and again, the Ukrainian people, right? I think Putin thought, and by the way, I think most of Ukraine's allies thought that Russia was much stronger than it was.
Mm-hmm.
And what we've seen in Ukraine is a very valorous and heroic people who don't want to be ruled,
Mm-hmm.
and we've seen more commitment from the West, right? For like again, it's sometimes it's been more begrudging than I would like, right? I think the
Mm-hmm.
defense of our allies is important to our own security, but we have ponied up, and the Ukrainians have fought bravely. And it's been 4 years, and Ukraine is still a country. And I mean the numbers. So when we just look at the numbers, and obviously every listen, again, war is awful, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these Russians. Well, I'm glad that Ukraine has fought back and retained their sovereignty and freedom. Um, it's been awful for both sides, right? A lot of these Russian troops that are dying, are 18-year-old kids who are conscripted, right, by this madman in Moscow. I mean, he's not a madman. I just
Yeah.
to be
No.
very clear. He's not insane. He's a very intelligent man, but this evil, territorial, ambitious man, right, who doesn't care about his people's lives, and millions of Russians have died. I mean, like when we talk about the U.S. being in forever wars because of the war on terror, right? So from
Mm-hmm.
the beginning of this century, basically, the difference in loss of troops between the number of troops, and I wish no American troops died, but the difference between the troops we lost in both Iraq in all of our military engagement for this century combined compared to what Russia has lost in the last 4 years, it's I mean I don't want to say a number because I don't have it down in front of
Yeah.
me,
Yeah.
but it's orders. I mean, it's so many
Ye-
orders of magnitude higher, right? And it's just they've they definitely, like, Putin thought this will be relatively easy, and it is not being that way.
Hey, yeah,
And so,
it's not a good look for them for sure. Militarily, it's not a good look. They look like a weak state, really, in comparison to their bravado and what people thought. Because at the beginning, many people thought this was going to be quick and easy, but the fact that it's dragged on doesn't look good nationally. Off of China, I mean, off of Russia to China, why don't you think China gets involved? Because they do get a lot of oil from Iran. I don't know what percentage. Let me ask the internet. But why do you think China is not like, yeah, we're not touching this?
well, and I think it comes, and again, one of the things, sometimes people roll their eyes when you start talking about morality and foreign
Mm-hmm.
policy, but I do believe that America, and I do believe Democratic and Republican, and I mean lowercase I Republican
Mm-hmm.
governments, right? Democratic governments, liberal democracy. I do believe these are morally superior systems. And at the end of the day, right, it's what we're going back at NATO, right? We have pushbacks with our allies, but at the end of the day, right, when it actually is push comes to shove, these alliances, right, they actually mean something. Where it comes to the axis of evil that it's being called, and I do think it's an
Mm-hmm.
axis. There's definitely been collaboration. Iran, China, Russia.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it is based. These are
Venezuela.
authoritarian regimes. Venezuela. These are
Mm-hmm.
authoritarian regimes, and while they have had some commitment to each other, they definitely work together on things. I don't think they are as morally committed to each other's defense
Mm-hmm.
as the West is.
Yeah.
I'm a Western supremacist, right? I
Mm-hmm.
do think our values are better.
Of
And
course.
I
Yeah.
think largely China, if China thought it was in its interests to help Ukraine, to help Iran right now, they would.
Mm-hmm.
If they thought it was in their interest to be more directly, now there's definitely been involvement in Ukraine, but they have not gotten directly involved, right? And I feel like if they, I mean, I know this, if they thought it was in their interest to be involved with Ukraine directly with Russia, they would. Now North Korea has been involved directly,
Mm-hmm.
but so there is some coordination, but they don't have the same mutual um, care that Western countries do. And I think that is part of it, right?
Uh,
Authoritarian regimes are about
Mm.
me, myself, and I.
Yeah, I just looked it up, and so this is where I've seen confusing things on the internet. So 80% of Iran's oil goes to China, but that only represents about 10 to 14% of China's oil usage. So that's why some people said, "Oh, China is dependent on Iran." No, it's Iran depending on China to buy 80% of their oil, which is kind of illegal, right? Because they have sanctions on it, but the US I guess doesn't want to mess with China either, so they kind of let it slide. But now that's going to lead me to my next question, which I'd like to hear from you
Before you ask that
is
question, before you ask that, one other thing, and
mhm
this is both a problem and also maybe something that keeps there from being more problems. But one of the reasons why China doesn't get it involved is because we always talk about the US's dependence on China, right? We have so many of our
mhm
manufacturing and stuff that's done there. And that's true. But the flip side of that is that China's economic model is also very dependent on the United States, right?
mhm
And so if that were to end, right, if they were to become an actual belligerent, right, that would hurt them economically. Now,
mhm
the loss of relationship with us as well, and it's something that I've long said. This is I've been very critical of Trump's tariffs, right, because generally
mhm
I'm a free trade person.
yeah.
But the one place, and I tell people this: if Trump's tariffs, if they were as targeted as his talk was initially, where he was very like I'm a China hawk, all this, right? And if it had just been national security tariffs aimed at getting America off, weaning America off of China's influence, I would have been supportive of that. But that's not what's happened.
Mhm.
But then on the flip side, people like Rand Paul, they bring up, right, well, do we really want to cut off trade with China? Because if there wasn't this dependence, would we not be at war? Like, would the chances of war be greater? And so that's
Mhm.
the flip side of the argument. I mean, I do think having, particularly the fact that we rely on China for, medications,
Yeah,
that we
yeah.
rely on China for what are the chips that go in our
Yeah.
phones. I
Mhm.
do think that's a huge national security risk. But again, foreign policy is complicated and there's a lot of moving parts.
It's kind of like Samsung and Apple, right? A lot of people don't know that Apple depends on Samsung displays for their iPhones. And so even though they're two rival companies, the shared mutual benefit of capitalism, right? Of making money off each other keeps them from, escalating any like tensions. It's the same with China, right? The fact we get so much from them, it's mutual beneficial. They don't want to mess with us because we're kind of their biggest buyers, and we don't want to mess with them in a sense. But that being said, a lot of people say that this president, excuse me, hold on, something got caught on my foot. It's impulsive, right? And he tends to be. I think he's his own worst enemy in the way he spouts things off. But do you also see that he's playing a long game? That by weakening Venezuela, weakening Iran, he's also by proxy weakening Russia and China. Do you think he has that in mind?
Um, I think it's fair. I think it's fair to surmise, right? And also I do think he has a very good person in his ear. And then
Mm,
listen, Marco Rubio he was on the Senate. He was on Senate Foreign Relations committees, right? He has a lot of experience, and so I definitely think that's in his ear. I also think that, of course, well, he has to defend it. One of the things that someone who's not a big fan of JD Vance or his ideology, it's
mm,
actually kind of made me over this last weekend a little more hopeful that JD Vance might not be the direction the Republican Party is moving, in the sense that JD Vance right now is having to defend things that he has expressly ran
yeah.
against, right?
Mm-hmm.
That the people, kind of the Groyper sphere that had a weird relationship with Vance, right? The post liberals, they can't be happy. And a lot of them are not happy with Vance right now
Mm-hmm.
because, of course, because Trump's doing it, he has to do it. Now he's defending it in ways that I think are dubious, right? But
Mm-hmm.
like it doesn't match with who he's been. But I think it actually long term undermines him because like the only way he can win is he has to maintain the Trump coalition, which
Mm-hmm.
includes a lot of people. There's more traditional conservatives
Yeah.
who people who generally I agree with on most things. They're part like there's a lot of them that are part of Trump's coalition, right? There's evangelicals, there's and there is and one branch is this post liberal wing,
Mm-hmm.
but the only branch that JD Vance had a true lock on is this post liberal wing, the Tucker
Yeah.
Carlsons, the Patrick Deneen's, the Rod Dreher's. And as the administration, in my mind, I think they're picking the right targets, right? Like, I
Mm-hmm.
hope that this we don't get dragged into a long extended war, but I hope they're successful. I want America to be
Mm-hmm.
successful. But these good actions, from my perspective, and more Reaganite conservatives, right, and again, who I tend to think are right,
Mm-hmm.
those very actions, though, by defending them, JD Vance is undermining himself with his only real base. The
Yeah.
people on the right who do not like, they're isolationist.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are, very anti-Ukraine. They're very anti-Israel. And, they supported Trump. They kind of held their nose and supported Trump once he put Vance on the ticket because they want Vance to be the guy.
Mm-hmm.
But if he loses them, then the 2028 primary, I think, will be an open field. And it's no guarantee. Like I said, he would still, right now, he's the vice president, right? He's still in a good relationship with Trump. So, you'd put him as the front runner.
Yeah, he's the
Um,
incumbent for sure.
but I don't think it's a lock.
So let me
And
ask you this.
maybe that's just wishful thinking on my part. But
Yeah. So do you think Rubio would be the choice if it's not Vance?
um, Rubio will certainly of the administration. I mean, he's the only one of the two of them. I mean, I think really he's the only one from the administration that can get. He could win Trump skeptical Republicans and MAGA Republicans. He's popular
Mm-hmm.
with both groups
Yeah.
because here's the secret:
He's
he's
become a
competent.
rock star lately.
Yeah,
You become well liked when they make positive memes out of you. That picture of him in the couch, and now the latest one because of Iran, he's going to be the next Ayatollah. You know what I mean? With all the jobs he has. Um, did you see his speech from 11 years ago when
which one?
the one
I've seen a
about
lot of this.
he said he's on the Congress floor and he's saying, "Look, the deal has been signed. This is the Obama deal,
Mm,
giving the money and kind of letting them start their program if they promise to be nice, right?" And Rubio says, what I'm going to say now can't change the vote. It's already been done, but I want to go on record for future generations that this is a bad idea." And it almost sounds prophetic. You know what I mean?
yeah,
That now we're at where we're at because he can see back then. And if he would run, and I'm not endorsing, but I'm saying if he runs, he could play that video in an ad and be like, "Look, I knew then, I know the problems of the world, and I can lead, the country post Trump." And so that was
yeah,
interesting to see how he understood what could be if we let Iran get missiles, and here we are.
yeah. So before we close,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
want to
Because
bring
I want
in.
to share though one. I'll let you go, but I
Oh,
want to share before we close something real petty, and I want to get your opinion if you think Trump was aware of it. Go ahead, though.
okay. So kind of one of the things I want to bring it back to, right? Obviously, maybe I'm going to ask two questions.
Mm,
So obviously, in our faith tradition, we are a prophetic people.
mm-hmm,
Um, and so I guess kind of pastoral advice. What would you
mm-hmm.
say to people, right, in our faith tradition, and not just in our faith tradition, right?
Yeah,
All
Christianity in general.
Christians believe Jesus is coming back,
Mm-hmm.
right? Now we have different beliefs and eschatological things, but we all believe Jesus is coming back. So how would you advise, just whether it's the Iran situation, not just Iran, but world events generally, how would you advise Christians to kind of keep that focus on, yes, we believe Jesus is coming back, we want to get the gospel out, but also not necessarily using prophecy as a crystal ball? How would you kind
Yeah.
of how would you be
Yeah,
able to balance?
that's a good question. And I've been thinking about this because I just finished this coming week I'm finishing a 27-week doctrinal series. So then the next series is going to be practical, how to live out your faith in the real world. And what I would say is something that I've been leaning to, which is render to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. In other words, be a good citizen, vote, but let the governments, once you cast your vote, let the governments do their work, right? Whether you agree with them or not, you cast your vote. So so then from the Christian perspective, pray for them, right? We're to pray for our leaders, whether they're Democratic or Republican or independent, pray for them and then concentrate on your local area, right?
Hmm.
You can't, we talk about it because we have opinions, but you and I are not affecting a single thing in Iran, right? We're just sharing, right? And the same for anybody else who views it differently. So concentrate on your people and let prophecy dictate. No, that's not the word. Let what we know for sure of prophecy, um, let that play out. But you can't pigeonhole every event in history into prophecy. We know what Revelation 13 says. We know what Revelation 14 says. Those are clear prophetic. These other things can be distractions. So continue to point people to the cross of Jesus Christ. And in general terms, let them know that no matter what happens in this world, God is in control. And in the end, God will make that which is wrong right and will guide us into all truth. Do not try to pigeonhole every single event into a prophetic chapter and verse. That's my
Hmm.
thoughts. How would you view that as a non-pastor?
Well, I would just say I love that you focused on the judgment of God, and I
Mm-hmm.
do think that helps a lot, right?
Yeah.
Because not just on foreign policy things, but with this Epstein thing, with
Mm-hmm.
yes, there are many abuses going on everywhere. And while I'm hopeful that maybe one of those abuses can end if the regime, if the Iran operation is successful,
Mm-hmm.
there's 50, 100, 200 other situations around the world of injustices. And America, the NATO, right, the free countries of the world, they can't stop them all. They will
Mm-hmm.
never stop them all. And knowing and being like, while we should obviously advocate for the oppressed, right? Whether it's the Uyghurs in
Mm-hmm.
China, right? Whether it's Christians in Azerbaijan, whether it's Christians in Nigeria, we should advocate for them. I do think that, but at the end of the day, we can't stop all the awful things that happen.
Mm-hmm.
But we serve a God who keeps very
Who
good
will?
records,
Yes.
and He will. He does say, "Vengeance is mine,"
Mm-hmm.
and so there will. And again, I'm not a big fire and brimstone type preacher, but there is, I think, some comfort to take in the fact that we serve a righteous judge, and we urge every man now to come to repentance. But to those evil people who do not come to repentance, there will be comeuppance, right? There
Mm-hmm.
will be justice, right? Jeffrey Epstein will suffer, assuming he didn't have a last minute,
Yeah,
conversion. I
conversion.
doubt,
I doubt it.
right? Like assuming
If
that,
I was a
right?
betting
And
man.
yeah, if I were a betting man, yeah. There will be justice for his victims. There will be
Mm-hmm.
justice for every name known and unknown on the Jeffrey Epstein list.
Yeah.
And so I just think that's an important message. So I appreciated that.
That's why I like Genesis 18 when Abraham tells God, "Will not the judge of the earth do what's right?" And the implied answer is yes, he will. That's why judgment in the Bible is so important, and God will make it right. Here's the last petty thing before we close,
Before,
and
before your petty thing,
okay, go
one more
ahead.
practical question.
Yeah.
So obviously we've had a lot of talk about geopolitics, about
Mm-hmm.
and the subtext of this is war,
Yeah.
and there's awful things that happen in war, right? And even in a just war, good people suffer,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I have Iranian friends, and some of those Iranian friends have friends and family in Iran, right? We remember that the majority, right? The fastest growing church in the world is the Evangelical Church of Iran.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if by some happenstance an Iranian Christian were to see this, whether they're expat, one of the people
Mm-hmm.
here, or by some miracle, or by some,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that'd be a miracle, but
Yeah,
by
yeah, I know.
some chance of history, Christians, Seventh day Adventists, or just our evangelical or Catholic or Orthodox brothers and sisters in Iran, or any other place where war is toying, or God forbid, should war ever come to our own shores, how do you think Christians ought to live? Not the ones, like, obviously we don't have to have a debate about pacifism
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. Just
Yeah.
ordinary Christians who are living life in a war torn area. Like, I don't know. That's just a thought that I had.
Okay,
And
yeah. Well, here's what I would say. If I had to give them one chapter to read, would be Hebrews chapter 11. And if it's actually what I'm going to be preaching on this Sabbath, because in Hebrews chapter 11 you see heroes of faith, right? And we tend to focus on that. But if you read it, and I encourage people to read it, if you see the pattern, it is wild. Because the pattern is this: you have Abel, right? And I'll just give you a glimpse. Right after that, you have Enoch. The very next verse. Well, one died early by faith, the other one never died by faith. Both of them, same faith, two different results, right? The very next after Abel and Enoch is Noah and Abraham. Noah lived in the same spot for 120 years preaching to the same people. Abraham, by faith, was a nomad, didn't even have a place to bury Sarah, right? And what the Bible's teaching us there is that faith never looks the same. And so to my Iranian brothers and sisters, you may be going through dark times, but Jesus is walking with you to the valley of the shadow of death. And if you should not get earthly freedom here, you have eternal freedom in Jesus Christ. So hang on. We're praying for you, and the judge of the earth will do right, whether in this lifetime or in the lifetime to come. And so that's my appeal to the Iranian people, which leaves me kind of sad that I'm going to share this petty thing here. But, Trump can be very petty, and I'll close with this. So on Saturday, it was confirmed that in the Islamic calendar, it's the 9th month and the 11th day, otherwise known as 9/11. Do you think he was that petty?
I doubt that. I doubt that he knows that. I doubt that he. I don't think Trump is an Islamic scholar.
Okay, but maybe his people. But that'd be hilarious if it was not hilarious, but it'd be petty is the word I'm looking. If that happened,
What's What's
watch.
the quote? All nature is but art unknown to thee, all chance direction which thou cannot see. I mean,
Yeah,
it's also true, Ellen White had a vision, right, where
mm,
she saw buildings in New York.
yeah, yeah.
Uh, um, she saw fire
Jetting
trucks in New York, and she
fiery
saw buildings.
arrows. She says it this way: fiery arrows jetting through the sky.
Hmm.
Right,
And it's
jetting. Using
recorded.
that word, jetting.
It's recorded in the Testimonies, Volume 9, on page 11.
It begins
Again,
on
am
page
I saying
11.
that
The
what?
actual it begins on page 11. The story, but the actual towers being hit is page 13. But the whole
Okay.
chapter begins 9/11. So things
Yeah.
that make you
Yeah.
go,
Again, and I'm not saying
yeah,
it's anything that
yeah,
particular
yeah,
thing, because I don't even think that was compiled. That wasn't compiled by. That's compiled
Mm,
by
yeah,
the
yeah.
publisher. But
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's a um what is the saying, a fool or a faithless or a foolish generation. I'm going to probably butcher this quote, but it's
Yeah,
basically a faithless and a foolish generation seeks a sign. No, a faithless generation seeks a sign, but a foolish one ignores a sign, or something to that
yeah,
effect.
yeah.
So,
So
like
I,
we shouldn't see signs in everything, but
mm-hmm.
you know,
Yeah, no, I just found it funny and petty if that was actually played any role in the bombing on Saturday. You know what I mean? Because I couldn't believe it was actually true. So I looked it up. Well, I mean, I really didn't look it up. I asked Grok, Gemini, and Chat, and they all said, yeah, it is the ninth month and the 11th day. So I was just like, that's hilarious. What a coincidence. Life sometimes is stranger than fiction. All right. On that note, on the Gio and Joey show, because I gotta wake up at 4:40 in the morning. Have a good night, everybody.